Of Mice and Men, this is a very popular and famous book written by renowned author John Steinbeck. But the title actually comes from a poem written by a fellow Scotsman of mine, Robert Burns. I was born about 5 miles from where he wrote the poem To a Moose. And just after he finished plowing the nest of the mouse, he wrote these words: "Wee coorin sleekit timorous beastie, oh what a panic's in thy breastie," and finished up with the words, "The best laid plans o' mice and men gang after gley." It was serendipity that I happened to be born so close to that location, but serendipity has played an enormous part in my life. I'm a bioorganic chemist, and today I am going to speak about mice and men, but not about literature. I want to talk today about living a longer, healthy life. So please, a show of hands. Would you like to live 10 more healthy years of life? Okay, everyone seems to agree with that. You're certainly not alone. I do. Maybe it's because I'm just about to turn 65 and I'm getting deluged with all the things to sign up for Medicare. But people say that time is money. But the reality is, I don't think that's correct. I think time is much more valuable than money. And an investment bank did some recent research which indicated that people routinely believe that health is more important than wealth. And in fact, people would spend 30 to 50% of their total assets for 10 more years of life. So let's think of a world where people did live longer. Think of someone who has made an incredible contribution to the world, society, the sciences, technology, the arts. Think how much better off as a world we would be if that person had 10 more productive years. I'm thinking of Albert Einstein. I think if he'd lived longer, we'd already have those outposts on Mars. But think about someone in your life, a loved one that has passed. Think how valuable 10 more years would have been with that person. I want to tell you that 10 extra years of healthy life is now a very realistic possibility, and I believe that in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to accomplish it. I'm sure you're all familiar with the fact that we have genes that provide the information for our body to make particular compounds. For example, we have genes that code for hemoglobin for us to carry oxygen in the blood to our important organs, or a gene for insulin to allow glucose to be carried into cells. It turns out there's actually a gene that largely determines how long we will live, what diseases we're going to be susceptible to, and actually how smart we're going to be. How did we find this out? And what are we going to do about it? Well, serendipity again. About 20 years ago, a researcher in Japan was working in a completely different field. And purely by chance, he created a mouse that had a very short lifespan. They didn't die of any particular disease. They just looked shriveled up, had wrinkly skin, they were weak, had poor muscle tone, poor cognitive abilities. They essentially died of old age at 20% of the normal lifespan. What Professor Kuro had done is he had deleted the gene that is necessary for a long, healthy life. Kuro and his colleagues continued to work on this gene, which they ended up calling Klotho. Klotho was one of the 3 Greek goddesses, the Fates, who determined all of the aspects of one's life. And Klotho was actually the particular one who spun the thread of life, and so was responsible for how long we would live. I think it's an appropriate name. Kuro continued to work on Klotho for several years, and until he was able to create another type of mouse, this time one that produced more Klotho than normal. And guess what? As shown on the diagram here, these animals live 20 to 30% longer. Well, this was such an exciting discovery that it stimulated scientists all over the world to really get into Klotho, try and work out its mechanism of action, what impact it had on disease, etc. They also studied the human gene for Klotho, and in fact discovered that there were some significant variations. But the important question everyone had at this point in time was, did the animal data that we had discovered in mice apply to humans? And the exciting answer I'm here to tell you today is, the answer is yes. Researchers at Johns Hopkins University and the University of California, San Francisco found that there are about 25% of the human population naturally produces more Klotho than normal. And these individuals have longer lifespan. They have larger brains. The prefrontal cortex of their brains is measurably larger. They have higher cognitive thinking abilities. And in fact, they measure out to have an average of 6 points higher IQ than the rest of us. There's also a very small group of people who have the genetic makeup that only allows them to produce much less Klotho than normal. And these individuals have substantially shorter lifespan and lower cognitive skills than the rest of us. So what are we going to do with this knowledge? Well, serendipity, again, plays a very big part in this picture because it brought me into the story. I want to go back 20 years. Come back with me. I come to San Diego after almost 20 years successful 20 years in the big pharma business on the East Coast. I want to come to where the action is, biotechnology, San Diego, the new way of developing exciting drugs. So I arrive here, get a job in an important biotech company, big salary, lots of stock options. I'm loving my job, living the dream. And one day my boss calls me into his office and sits me down and fires me. It was such a humiliating experience. I was so embarrassed, felt terrible. I can't remember much from that year, but every detail of that meeting is etched in my brain. But you know, in retrospect, that was the most important day of my career and had the most impact on my life. Because for the first time in almost 20 years, I was off the work treadmill. I had several months off to really think about what I wanted to do with my life, what mattered to me, what excited me. And when I analyzed it, I came to the conclusion I really should become a consultant. And so for the last 20 years, I've been consulting with biotech companies, helping them raise money and devise their product development and business development strategies. It's been a great ride for me. And recently, I got a new client called Klotho Therapeutics. What attracted me to Klotho Therapeutics is that they are developing or trying to develop Klotho as a drug. And they're doing it in the most direct way, which is developing proteins like the natural material that can be injected, just like we inject insulin today. There are other methodologies to use. There's a company on the East Coast that is developing traditional small molecule drugs that they hope will stimulate natural Klotho production. But the evidence for direct injection of Klotho is much stronger, in my opinion. And so I think it is the highest probability of success. This evidence is particularly strong in mice. It turns out that most of the Klotho in our bodies is produced in the kidneys. And when you have kidney failure, the Klotho production is shut down, and this leads to a downward spiral in kidney function. Kidney disease affects 850 million people around the world, more than 10% of the global population, and kills millions of people every year. Kuro's colleagues at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas found that injection of Klotho into mice that had kidney failure reduced the damage to the kidney, promoted healing of the kidney, prevented the progression of the disease to a chronic condition, and actually prevented the formation of heart failure, which is the leading cause of death amongst those patients. Other work has shown, by other scientists, has shown that Klotho injection reduces the size of tumors in cancer, reduces frailty and muscle wasting in older animals, and perhaps most importantly is the impact on cognition. Work done at UCSF has indicated that a single injection of Klotho into young or old mice improves their ability to learn, it improves their cognitive skills and executive functioning skills. We expect to see similar results to this when we go into humans, and so we are driving forward as quickly as possible to get started in human clinical trials. But you know, I've talked about serendipity, but serendipity is not enough. I'm really disappointed that it's taken so long. That initial article that I showed you from Kuro in Nature was in 1997. That's 21 years. And we're still 3 to 5 years away from having an approved drug for Klotho. So that's particularly disappointing because millions of people have died unnecessarily from kidney disease in that time frame. And this reminds me a lot of another very important scientific medical discovery, penicillin. You're probably familiar with the story with Fleming in 1928. He had mistakenly opened a Petri dish, had an open window, a penicillium spore landed on the Petri dish and killed all the bacteria that he was growing. It took 14 years until 1942, until the first human use of penicillin. Way too long. The reason for it was that Fleming was not a very good communicator. He did not do a good job of touting how important a discovery he had made. And as a result, millions of people died unnecessarily from TB, pneumonia, and simple infections that are easily cured with penicillin. So getting the word out is very important. Communication is very important. When I started working on Klotho a year and a half ago, I had never heard of Klotho. And in that intervening time, I've talked to hundreds of people in the biotech business, and very, very few of them have heard of Klotho either. So that's why I'm here. I'm trying to tell the story of Klotho. And like TED, I think this is really an idea worth sharing. I hope you agree. I'm confident that with Klotho, we can live well longer. I'm very optimistic that in the next 3 to 5 years, Klotho will be approved for kidney disease, for cognitive function, and for improving the diseases of aging. My message for you, though, is take advantage of serendipity when you get it. Aggressively pursue your discoveries. Learn from the adversity that comes across in your life, like I did from being fired. But perhaps more importantly, spread the word. Make sure that people know that you've made this discovery and it's worthwhile. Aging is not inevitable, and with Klotho, I think we will learn to control it. So please make the most of the extra 10 years you're going to get. Thank you.